something that can't be understated is having leadership buy-in for a workplace wellbeing strategy. It's crucial. You have to have the leaders being bought into what you're trying to do. They need to role model it. They need to champion it. They need to consistently communicate about it to their teams. I think this is a really understated element, but it's so crucial. I think when people look to their leaders, they want to be able to see them walking the walk. I think that's really, really important.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Plum Pod, where we speak to HR leaders and talk about strategies, well-being, L&D, and everything that helps people to thrive in workplaces. And today, we're joined by Laura Miller, who has kindly said yes to come on our first episode of our Plum Pod. Laura, thank you for saying yes and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, before we get into anything, would you like to introduce yourself? What do you do? Where do you work? And a little bit of the charity aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I work for an organisation called Charity Finance Group, and I've been there for the last 10 years. I'm the head of HR there. I'm CIPT qualified, and we have a small but mighty team of 27. We're remote first, which is what we call our arrangement. And it's a really exciting place to be in the charity sector at a time when a lot of charities are having to do more with less. So it's a good challenge, and no day is the same.
You did start off by saying you're a little bit nervous talking on this podcast. And I think stress is one of the underlying issues that we're going to be talking about also on this podcast. So first, how are you feeling now?
I am still nervous because it's my first time doing something like this. But thank you for making me feel at ease. And we're just going to have a conversation.
Absolutely. It's just a conversation. And a very important conversation as well. Because, we're obviously talking about well-being in the workplace. And before we started this podcast as well, we were talking about, the shifts that are happening within the workplace. The last couple of years have been extremely difficult on organizations, on the leadership team, but really on the HR teams as well. There has been a lot of movements, people coming in and out, and now with the whole AI revolution as well, a lot of jobs sadly are being lost, and there's a lot of change management and a lot of uncertainty. And as we know, uncertainty causes stress and anxiety. So, let's just kick off from there, just from a macro level. How do you see the world has changed and the world of HR has changed in the last 4 years?
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting time the past 4 years. I think from a HR perspective, we have had to support organisations, every individual, through such a significant period of change that there's almost change fatigue now. And there's one thing that we know, there's going to be more change. It's just it's the one constant that we know is going to happen. I think HR professionals, we're starting to see the data is saying that HR is one of the areas where burnout is quite high. And I think it is, the past 4 years has taken its toll, not just in HR, on everybody. And so I think it's really important that HR professionals really try to look after themselves first. It's that saying when you get on a plane, isn't it? Put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others. I think if we're to do our best in HR to help other people thrive, we have to look after ourselves first. We have to practice what we preach.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think it's also quite difficult. Practicing what you preach is easier said than done. And I think that's not just limited to HR professionals. I think just us human beings. It's easy. It's very easy for me to tell you how you should operate your life, but it's very difficult for me to practice that. What would you say the missing links? I mean, why is it so difficult for HR to take care of HR themselves first within an organization. What is the problem? Let's talk about the problem first, and then we can come to the solution.
I think one of the things that is tricky in HR is the amount of work that we will undertake. I'm a HR generalist, so every area of HR I'm responsible for, and that's a lot. I work part-time, and whilst my team's small, 27 of us in total, I think when you have an organisation of people, it's tricky to manage. There's a high amount of admin. There is a lot of workload capacity issues. Like I said earlier on, the charity sector is doing more with less. We are having to, stretch our budgets. There's not enough time in the day to do all of the things that we need to do. So I'd say that the problem is in HR, we have so much work to do. It's what takes priority at any given time. And oftentimes the HR professional will fall to the bottom of that list.
Yeah. And what would you say, perhaps maybe there's no straight answer or right answer to this, but what would you say is the solution to this problem?
It's a really
or solutions to the problem.
It's a really tricky one. I think it is that thing of, if you can't look after anyone else, your team, your organisation, well, if you're not looking after yourself. And it is those small behavioural changes that you can make, that prioritisation, making sure that you're taking your lunch break, that you're not overworking hours. It's those really small things that are really easily said but really easily missed in your day-to-day work. You think, I don't have time to walk around the block for 10 minutes at lunchtime. But the impact of, if you do, it reaps so much back. It's so worth it. But and I recognise it can, it's easy for me to say, I don't do it. There's a lot of days I don't do it. And so I don't want to be hypocritical, but I think it is those small, consistent changes that you can make. One of the things that I use, particularly at work, is the mood tracker on Plum. And I find that really, really helpful for me to just reflect back on how's my last month been, and what can I do the month going forward to improve that score if it maybe isn't where I'd want it to be.
Yeah. I think journaling is super important, and that boils down to accountability. I think we need to, for things to change, we need to make that change first within ourselves. I think that's super important. You spoke about charities are in a space where they're having to do more with less. I think that's people have not coined it as a recession, but I think we're in the global economic downturn has been on since a year and a half, almost 2 years now. So I think most companies are feeling that heat. Most companies are in a similar situation. So what do you think a company as a collective can do? So, where I'm coming from is, okay, so you're having to do more with less, but there's also an economic downturn. So what do you really do? So, how can maybe, from a solution perspective, how can HR really come up with proposed solutions for the organizations to then follow? And the reason I ask you this question is because I also feel, for the most part, because now, like you rightly said, there's just too much workload. And I'm guessing most of the workload is admin related. So if most of your day has gone towards admin, lets you only so much space to do strategy or to think about actual solutions, because you're just constantly doing an execution. So hence why my question is, from a strategic point of view, how can HR really come in, step in and help organizations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think where our workloads are so admin heavy, we have to carve out the time to make sure the work that we're doing has an impact. It's not the what we do that matters. It's the so what. And one of the ways I think that we can do that is by, where we were talking about admin, use that data that we've got, the things that we have at our fingertips to create that story, to put a strong business case together for our leadership teams to say, this is why this is really important. HR has to be, the people strategy has to be at the heart of an organization. Without without the people, what truly are organisations going to do? And I think by looking after them as best you can, that's when we're going to help them to thrive, which is only going to, the data is obvious. It reaps so much rewards when you invest in your people and in your teams. So I would say use the admin, use the data that you've got and create that really strong storytelling, piece for your leaders to really invest in your people.
But are leaders really listening to HR?
It's a good question. I think we need to have a proper seat at the table in a way that maybe other functions in organisations have that HR hasn't quite managed to. We're starting to see it slightly with the rise of, the chief people officer roles and things like that. But I'd say in traditional organisations, it still, might come under other things like finance and operations. And your HR team are going to be there for organisations to really get the best out of their people. So they need to have a seat at the table. They need to have that voice, and they can give you so much insight into potential solutions. I think leaders are listening, but I wonder if they're truly hearing what the HR teams or the data is really saying.
Yeah, because, and we spoke about this before we started the pod, what is a company? A company is simply a collective of people, right? And who is the custodian of these people? It is a HR. So if like you rightly said as well, there's data which backs that if your people are thriving, the changes that you make are going to help your people thrive. And if your people thrive, the company, quote unquote, thrives. So I think that storytelling or that narrative needs to be much more, solid. And I think maybe, and again, we spoke about accountability before that as well. I think HR also, in my personal opinion, HR should start taking accountability in terms of, okay, so this is the narrative, and this is something that you have to see and you have to action. Mm-hmm. But again, easier said than done, like we've said this before. What do you think, again, from a problem perspective for companies, just so that I understand the HR's mind as well, what do you think is the blocker from the management team? Why has HR not got a seat on the table yet?
I think it's traditionally seen as quite, a back office function, tick box exercise to have your HR team there, to do the compliance piece, to do the administration. And I think HR really need to work on our brand to really push that strategic people analysis piece that we can bring, that we have in our roles. We know how people are feeling in the team. We can share that insight with the leadership team, but I think it's tricky where we are bedded down into a lot of the admin and compliance level rather than having that space carved out to do that strategic. And that's on us to carve out that space and to really demonstrate that we can add value. I think another thing in HR is something we've not traditionally maybe been good at is being evidence-based and really using analytics and data, which we're starting to see obviously increase with AI and a lot of the digital tools and tech that we can use. But I think you have to speak the leadership team's language and are using the data that you've got and creating a really compelling storytelling piece. Use the other functions in the organisation. I work really closely with my amazing communications team when we're working on HR pieces, because internal comms is such an important thing of what I do in my organisation. Use the expertise that's around you and, follow their lead. How do they work really well with the leadership team? How do they ever see it at the table, and try to leverage that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, the language they understand, companies, is, I would say, one of the prime language is revenue. And rightly so also, because, we need to appreciate that revenue is also the lifeline of a business, and it's really important. So, if I were to give an example, a salesperson comes in, the salesperson is shining. Why? Because the salesperson is generating revenue. And HR's function was just to do that paperwork for the salesperson to come in. However, the world has changed. And I think one of the things that you've spoken about now is, the analytics and the data and the AI. So if we backtrack, even a few years ago, we didn't have the analytics that we have today. We were not able to make data-driven decisions as we have the ability today.
Yeah.
So off the back of that data, okay, this individual has come in and this individual is performing at this level. But there's so much that you could do off the back of that data that you're collecting so that the individual then thrives and then level up and then performs that much more better, impacting themselves because now it's helping them, but also organization on a whole. So I think really maybe if we try and decipher the code, it's simply because we didn't have the tools or the data sets a couple of years ago versus we do today. So I think from a management perspective, is for management to understand that today you have the resources and the tools to be able to manage your people in a better way and to be able to get the best out of them, which will then help them and it will help the company. Right. So I think maybe that's the shift. And of course, now COVID, we will touch on well-being in a bit. But COVID also has dramatically changed a lot of things. I'm going to touch on the AI piece or the technology, the tech piece. We operate in a different way. You said, your company is remote first. We're also remote first. I mean, if you backtrack again a couple of years ago, this was never a reality.
No one talked about remote first.
No one talked to it. It was impossible. But now you see things have changed because of technology. Whenever there's a downturn in an economy or something goes wrong, it inevitably advances technology or accelerates, the whole tech growth. So I think to understand that, I think maybe that's the first step. Okay, we were not able to provide that benefit or that help or that information to you guys before this, but now we can. I think maybe that's a starting point.
Absolutely. And when you were talking about when, an individual levels up and is really, really performing, there's research out there that just by being in the same team or sitting near that individual, other employees will also level up. I think that's really interesting, that proximity piece, which has implications for those organisations that are remote first hybrid working. But I do think that the way the digital tools and tech acceleration that we've seen over the past couple of years, I think that if we're open to it and we're ready for this change and we can embrace it, it's going to change the world of work for the better. We're now seeing that neurodivergent employees are feeling a lot more able to enter the workplace because there are these tools that they can use and they can put these strategies in place that make them feel comfortable being at work. And that to me means we can create working cultures that are going to thrive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you talk about culture, let me link that back to the well-being aspect as well, because we spoke about COVID. So, how do you think COVID, since we've obviously now it's become old news, no one really talks about it. It's great that, human beings have a short-term memory. It just helps us to keep moving forward in life. But how do you think the whole conversation around mental health has evolved or changed since then?
It's certainly had an impact. I think when COVID hit and a lot of people were reporting that feeling of loneliness where we were, isolated, I think that really opened up and turned a corner around the conversation about mental health. And we know that, initiatives like the Time to Talk Day, for example, things like that, I think there has been work done over the last 4 and a bit years, probably even before COVID, that has really improved the quality of conversations that we would have around mental health in the workplace. There's still a way to go. There are still gaps, and there's still a lot of fear. People are worried they're going to say something wrong. People don't feel that they can share information. It's not something they should talk about at work. So there's a long way to go. But I do think that since the pandemic and the changing ways of working, it has destigmatized the mental health kind of arena somewhat.
I think stigma is a big one, and 100% things have drastically changed. Of course, there's a lot of stigma even today, but a couple of years ago, the stigma was even more so. And I think from a management perspective as well, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a talk and we're talking about the whole disparity between men and women when it comes to workplace and then leadership, as you go up the leadership ladder, you see that disparity keeps on increasing more and more. And when you look at mental health and the stigma around mental health, so two factors. One is somehow the older generation and also men. There's a lot more stigma, generational stigma attached to us. And again, when it comes to mental health and the stigma around mental health. So, if you talk about the disparity between men and women in leadership, so which means there are a lot more men in the leadership space. And of course, a lot more from, slightly older generation as well. So hence why the stigma is even more so. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I have to say at Charity Finance Group, I'm in a very privileged position that our top senior leaders are all female.
Oh, fantastic.
It's a wonderful place to work where our CEO, Karen, and her deputy CEOs, Claire and Sarah, they are working mums. They are, it's lovely to have them as our role models.
Amazing.
So we are very lucky, and that it has been my experience. But of course, I know of the research that's out there about once you're looking at C-suite board level, it is pale male stale, as I often read. Not a polite way to say it. But I think that does then have the impact that they're not quite as open or ready to talk about these things. But I think the more we do, the more we role model and champion and we talk about it, they will have to. It just has to be that consistent continuity of the communication around mental health, and it can't be ignored. And the evidence is clear that when you invest in, mental wellbeing platforms like Plum, the return on investment is clear. And I don't think that, even though those generational stereotypes can shy away from that evidence base.
So Laura, let's talk about wellbeing strategies in the workplace now. So what do you think are some of the most essential elements that go into an effective or building an effective workplace strategy?
I think if you consider wellbeing holistically, so starting with the pillars of wellbeing, so taking each one in turn and looking at, review what you've currently got and try to understand and allocate them to each pillar to make sure that you've kind of looked at well-being from a holistic point. It's not just the mental health aspect. There's lots of things in there. I think that's really important. I think something that can't be understated is having leadership buy-in for a workplace well-being strategy. It's crucial. You have to have the leaders being bought into what you're trying to do. They need to role model it. They need to champion it. They need to consistently communicate about it to their teams. I think this is a really understated element, but it's so crucial. I think when people look to their leaders, they want to be able to see them walking the walk. I think that's really, really important. I think our HR teams are very good at understanding like the current feeling and sentiment within the team and being able to kind of capture that, whether it's through pulse surveys or polls or things like that. I think being able to capture that and have that data can really help and inform how you iterate on the strategy. So things can change, and you don't want this just to be a document that's static and no one ever looks at again. It has to constantly be iterated on, and you need to reflect on what your team are talking about and asking for. And on that, I think that's the most important thing. Ask your people what they want and really listen to them. They are experts in their own right about what they need and what a good workplace is going to be. They'll have got experience of what good work is for them, and ask them, truly listen to them, and try to implement some of the ideas that they come up with. I think they're really good starting points for creating a good workplace wellbeing strategy.
I quite like what you just said. People are experts in their own right. Obviously, I know what I need, and I'm different from you.
Yes.
So I think that is really important for leadership to also understand. What are the, if we were to get into maybe some technicalities, like actual action steps, if you were to give leadership, what do you think they would be?
Start small. It doesn't have to be these, big sweeping changes, these big initiatives that cost lots of money. It doesn't have to be that. Start small. I think people have an inherent desire to be listened to and truly heard. I know I just said that and I'm repeating myself now, but I think it's something that HR professionals are very good at, is being that listening ear and providing that space for people. But what they say can be so informative for leaders to then shape what the workplace wellbeing strategies can look like. I think you start small, you talk to your team, you listen. People will come up with the most amazing and wonderful and yes, expensive ideas, but some of them come up with fantastic non-financial ideas that you can easily put into place. I know at CFG, we're very lucky that our board and our leadership team bought into us having wellbeing weeks. So for 2 weeks every year, we have one in the summer and one in the winter. We close the whole organisation for the week. It's when everyone downs tools, and we have this. It's different from annual leave because we're all off at the same time. You know, when you know you're going on annual leave and you have to prep your handover documentation and make sure you've squared away your emails and your meetings. We don't have that for wellbeing weeks because we're all off all together. And so there really is that time for rest and recuperation. And when we come back, we really see the team energized and ready to go. So we've just had our summer one, and we've shared an article on our website about what some of us got up to during our wellbeing weeks. And I think people are really looking forward to the winter one, which we do after the festive season, which has been, it can be very busy for people. So they're a very good benefit that we have at Charity Finance Group. It's helped us hugely recruitment and retention wise. But I recognise I sit in a very privileged position being able to talk about wellbeing weeks. I don't think it has to be, you don't have to implement things as drastically as those. I think wellbeing days, wellbeing afternoons, a protected hour once a month for rest and recuperation, walk and talk meetings, using delay delivery on emails so they're not sent out of hours. I think there are such small initiatives that you can really embed into the workplace culture that promotes well-being.
I love that. You are really lucky to have that entire well-being week. I'm thinking, oh my God, I need to see the photos of your website, because that's really amazing. I mean, and you're so right, where obviously we all have annual leaves and so on, but then there's this handover process and the company is on, everybody else is working, you're not working. Sometimes, depending on the position you're in also, you have a guilt trip as well. And if you don't have a guilt trip, you're kind of still working, your brain is still active, but for you to know that the entire company is off and you guys are somehow celebrating together, that's just a different perspective. I mean, I've never experienced that, but I'm just thinking, oh wow, that's amazing.
It is. We are very lucky to have this benefit, and I'm so grateful for our trustees and our leadership team with letting us bring this on board. I brought it in 2022.
Oh, it was your initiative?
Yes. So
amazing.
And thankfully I was very lucky to speak to the Mental Health First Aid in England CEO Simon Blake at the time, because that's something that his organisation does. So they have one in the summer, and we were coming out of the pandemic time, and I was looking at our staff survey data, and I was really, really concerned about people feeling burnout, overwhelmed at work, the feeling of stress, being able to raise mental health, personal issues at work. And this was one of the ideas that I put to the leadership team to see if this would be a non-financial reward that we could put into place that might help our team. And I'm thrilled that every time we, survey and poll the team pre and post wellbeing weeks, the data is there that we can show it has a clear impact.
You know how small actions sometimes have huge impact, and then there's a ripple effect. I'm going to say something now, and I'm going to put this on record because obviously this is recorded. Because you've mentioned this to me now, I will personally look into that for Plum. So thank you for sharing that, by the way.
Thank you.
This is amazing. It's amazing.
Lovely.
And this is the value of these conversations.
It really is. And if there's anything that I can help with that in terms of sharing the data and things
that's
like
amazing. I will be reaching out to you. Thank you. Laura, talking about diversity and inclusion, first of all, it's fantastic. I mean, congratulations to your entire organization. And I think that's a very privileged position to be in when your entire leadership team is all female. Especially, we spoke about the disparity between male and female when it comes to leadership. So that's amazing. But I mean, when you look at an organization, not two people are the same. Even if you're the same gender, again, not two people are the same. So how do you, when you look at initiatives and the whole well-being aspect, how do you cater to different, dynamics of different people? So how are you ensuring that you're inclusive and you're mindful of the diversity within the team?
Yeah, I think that there's two things I'd touch on here. So I think you're right. Everyone is an individual. They're unique. They have their own, access preferences to things. So we try to make sure that when we're engaging with, service providers that will help us in our well-being strategy, we're questioning them. We're saying, okay, do you have this in audio, large, braille formats? Do you have BSL interpreters for your courses? Because there will be people in our team that will need access to that. And I think it's making sure that you're asking those questions up front before you bring in providers. You want to be able to be, you want access for everybody for these things. I think something that's really interesting with Plum and that helps our neurodivergent employees is that it doesn't have to be a video chat or an in-person chat with a therapist, which doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think the chat-based therapy, Emma, which the AI assistant we can use 24/7, I think those things are so important for people that are, that are not neurotypical. And then the second strand that I was going to talk about around that accessibility and that kind of making sure that well-being strategies work for every individual, I think what we're going to start to see in the near future is that kind of a very individualized approach to well-being initiatives. So things like that existed 5 years ago, like free lunch in the office or, the on-site gym, they've lost their power in a way because of how we are all working differently now. Like CFG are remote first. Those things have lost their kind of importance. So what's going to fill that gap? And I think that we will shift into a space where people pick and choose the wellbeing initiatives that work for them, and they leave the ones on the side that don't. And so I think wellbeing providers will need to kind of cater to that kind of individualized pick and mix sort of style.
I think, it's great that CFG is remote first. I mentioned that we're also remote first. But I think what people really need is that what you just said, flexibility in everything. Because the world has drastically changed the last couple of years, and flexibility, even when it comes to the whole well-being aspect, because yes, not everyone is the same, and some people maybe want that pizza and beer.
Yes,
and they need that connection with their colleagues. People. It works for some people, and I know social media is a very interesting place where there's a lot of polarization, but sometimes it's not this or that. Sometimes it is, yes, in between. Life really, for the most part, is grey.
It's grey.
It's not just black and white, So I think that flexibility is really important. And yeah, I mean, how do you think we can do more around that? So what I'm trying to get to is, how do we first ensure what our people actually need? Because sometimes when you're onboarding a new member of staff, some questions are maybe a little bit too sensitive to ask, and maybe you're asking from a place where you really want to be able to help them in a better way.
Yeah.
But how do you manage that?
It's a really good question. And in our HR induction at the Charity Finance Group, we've got obviously the standard HR induction that you would do. And one of the pieces that we kind of pause midway through it, and we want it to be a conversation where we say to the individual, right, so we're getting to know you too. What's important to you and what can CFG do to help that? I think that question it's so important because we get to know each other beyond a transactional level. And then we can actually implement those things that or highlight the things that already exist in that could really help that. Someone says to us, well, I've got a young family, I need, the flexibility in the working hours, and we point them to the flex time policy. Or someone says, oh, I'd really like to be able to do, have a sabbatical, or I'm a volunteer, and we point them to the volunteering policy. We're very lucky at CFG, we get 4 paid volunteering days every year.
Amazing.
It's so important for us that, we're an infrastructure charity. I want the employees at CFG to really feel connected to a cause that's important to them. Like I said to you before we started the podcast, I'm a trustee for an organisation called Charity Works that aims to help graduates and non-graduates into leadership positions in the charity sector. So I think it comes back to asking people directly, what do they want, listening to their answer and seeing what you currently have in your offering that could work to that, and being open to going, we've missed something here, we've not addressed this, okay, what can we do to address it?
So Laura, what practical steps do you think companies can take to be able to integrate well-being activities and initiatives in the day-to-day operations?
I think my first step is the CIPD Pillars of Wellbeing article is so helpful. It's a really good piece of research and reading into all the holistic view of wellbeing. I think it's a great starting point. I think, like I said previously, analyse what you've got is your wellbeing offering, and try to figure out what pillars do they sit under, and so then where are your gaps? What do you need to address? What are the bits that you have missed? And be open to constructive criticism and feedback from your team. I think it's hard to hear, but I think you've got to be ready to hear that from your team and go, you're actually not doing this very well and this would really support me. And you take that, and it's about receiving feedback well, which is something that we also trained the CFG team in, giving and receiving feedback, because it's such a crucial part of our day-to-day work. But really listen to people about what they want. One of the things that we've been talking about outside of the podcast is the continuity and the consistency of communication. If you don't shout about the wellbeing offerings that you have, your team are not going to know about them. Just really make it clear, and you might think you're over communicating it, but I don't think you'll ever be in a situation where you've over communicated something to your team, especially in this area. I think it's so important to just regularly touch upon some of the offerings that you have, and do it in a consistent way, that it's not just a one email sent, tick the box, done. It's consistent, and try to really embed that in your day-to-day daily activities. I think something at CFG that we try to do when we have our weekly team meetings is we check in on our well-being, and we say, how are you feeling today? And it's really important that we celebrate success, but also it's okay to take time and go, I'm not feeling myself today, and this is what I can do to help that. But ultimately, I think overall, my main message is ask your individuals and listen to them.
Laura, that was music to my ears. And I'll tell you why. Because again, you spoke about data a lot. So obviously we are looking at our data as well in terms of the impact that we're making in all different industries and different sectors and so on. And it's very interesting that we see the correlation, or let's say the uptake data, between a partner who is vested versus who's not. It's a direct correlation. And it's obviously not rocket science. I've said this so many times that Plum is not going to come in your organization and magically transform everything. It's just not going to happen. It will only happen if we have vested interest. You spoke about, the company and the leadership team to have that vested interest. And for us, it's really our HR partner to have that vested interest. Because if we don't have that, we can have the best solution under the sun, but it's not going to work. So, and I've said this so many times as well, it's like when you look at, going into a therapy sessions, for example, you could be speaking to the best therapists on this planet. But if you're not going to be accountable, and if you don't take action, no therapist is going to change you or save you. It's impossible. And I think that partnership between Plum and the organizations is the same, and that same partnership between the HRDs and the employees and the team members. So I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that, because that change will only come if you take that first step and you want to make that change. Obviously, you're looking at all these solutions. That is the first step you've taken, but then it's not a one and done. Like, you have to actively, constantly work on it. And we spoke about consistency. So you have to be consistent on your comms and on having initiatives, especially in this day and age. You're remote first, we're remote first. Most companies are remote first. Communication becomes that much more harder, because it's great how technology has brought us together, but it's also created a separation. So we need to work harder on that communication. We need to work harder on building that environment where people are able to, use the different initiatives and tools and, services that you provide, and then benefit themselves and thrive.
Absolutely. I think the intentionality we need to put behind our communications now we work remote first is so important. It does mean we carve out the time to make sure those things are planned and regular and consistent. But that goes some way to bridge the gap where we're not, in the same office sharing the same air. But I think, and I don't think it doesn't have to be complicated. I remember when we first brought Plum into CFG and we had a couple of demos with your amazing customer account managers. And then the regular drip feed of information that we got from Plum. So the monthly events, the self-guided courses, the meditation soundscapes, everything that was being added, I always felt like I was finding that out monthly and I was able to share that with my team monthly. We have, a number of our employees at CFG talk so highly of Plum. So thank you so much for creating a really great product.
Oh, thank you so much. That honestly made my day. Thank you. And for everyone listening from my team as well, I'm sure you've made all our days as well. Thank you. In terms of strategies, again, coming back to that, how can strategies help organizations maintain a focus on mental well-being, especially during this whole challenging economic times? Because yes, I want to be able to take care of my employees' mental well-being, but oh my God, there's a budget constraint, or oh my God, there's something else going on.
I think, it's not easily dismissed, that has its validity too. I think budget is a common obstacle, but I think we've talked about there are small initiatives that you can put into place that don't cost very much budget or time, which is also, people don't have very much time these days. I think having a really strong evidence-based business case from the start for things is super important. I feel like I'm a bit like a stuck record today talking about these things. But you touched on change. I think as an organisation, it's really important that you have an agreed change management model that you follow, that everyone understands what stages we are at. So there's that, again, consistency. But I think a change management model can be really helpful in this space. And when you encounter any skepticism or resistance towards initiatives, I think for HR, we do well to approach that from a place of curiosity and go, well, what's behind that? And ask the questions and really try to tease out, well, what sits behind that initial skepticism or rejection of an idea? I think that's a really, really important thing to do.
Taking the organization into a therapy session more so.
Yes, the whole organization.
Trying to peel the onion.
Absolutely.
So how can businesses ensure that their well-being programs are inclusive? I know we spoke about this before as well, to give them options, but I mean, what's the starting point? So maybe that's the end point. Okay, so you need to have different optionality for people, but what's the starting point? How can they ensure that from the get-go that is top of their mind?
I think more and more we're seeing that's the frame that you look at anything that you do, how you move forward, that fairness, inclusivity and belonging are the starting point for any initiative that you're going to do. But I think it does mean giving people a voice that potentially have been marginalised, and making sure that you're really listening to them. What do they need and what do they want, and what can we do to help with that? But making sure you're really listening to those individuals. I know some, big organisations have the employee resource groups that can really feed into how they shape that. And those can be such a wealth of knowledge in there. It's around how HR capture that, again, data and insight from those places across teams that can be really just hugely beneficial.
We spoke about budgets before this.
Yes.
And the more people I speak to in HR, the more I start to realize is, and I don't know, maybe your experience is slightly different, but the more I'm realizing is that every HR understands the importance of the mental well-being or the general well-being of their people. And definitely that's a core of any strategy that they make for the workplace. But now budget, and they're not sitting on the budget. Now the management team is sitting on the budget. So there's budget constraints as well. So they want to implement, but they don't have budgets. So what advice would you give these people who are trying to, fight for a budget, but so data could be one metric, but the problem is, let's say they don't even have access to data because they've never initiated or implemented any type of strategy where they were able to collect data. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about a platform or a service per se. So what advice would you give those people who are struggling at this point in time?
Persevere. Perseverance, determination. I think that's something HR professionals are quite good at. I think, and I know what you're saying about, we might not have the data at our fingertips, but I think HR is uniquely placed at being able to draw out data, whatever form. Yeah. It doesn't have to be that kind of analytics, but the story, the narrative that people will share, being able to capture that, staff surveys, polls, pulse things, anything that you can draw out that helps you build that business case and then supplement it with the human stories. I think that's really, really helpful, but perseverance can't be overlooked. I think, and like I think we said at the start, HR professionals, look after yourselves first. Put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help others thrive. I think that's really important. We have to not just talk the talk, we need to walk the walk.
Yeah, no, 100%. What would you say how things have changed? I'm not deliberately plugging Plum here now, but really because Plum is your mental well-being initiative. So how has things changed? And really, this is not limited to Plum. People could, buy into any other initiative that is available. But just from your experience, how has it impacted your organization and the people within your organization?
Hugely. I think when I look back at our traditional employee assistance program or EAP, our engagement rate was for the cost and the time that we implemented it and then the usage, it was so user friendly. And I think a lot of traditional EAPs are hard to use and they don't get that good engagement rate. I think something with Plum, it's so easy for the team to use and we have such great access. It's integrated into our team, so it's there. You just click it into it, and it's just part of your day now. I think it's had such a wonderful impact at CFG. I can see it in across the team. They speak so highly of it. And through all different elements that Plum offers, it's not just the chat-based therapy, it's all the video therapy with counsellors. I think even, we talk about the soundscapes quite a lot. Some of us find it really useful to do those. The live events that we can go to, and then the bank of courses that we all have access to at any one time. It's just fantastic. And one of the things that we've been really lucky to do at CFG is train 2 of our employees to become mental health first aiders.
Amazing.
So, and one of them was on the Plum course. So it's been amazing. And we've actually got one of our, another employee who's going to do their training next month too. So it's super exciting. And it's so important that these things are embedded, that the team know they don't just have to go to their line manager or to HR. There are other people within the team that are trained to support them if they're suffering with mental ill health.
Yeah. I mean, it's a ripple effect that we spoke about before this as well, So if that one person uses the service, that one person now benefits from it, speaks to their colleague, and then now that becomes 2 and then 4 and then 6, and then it just changes the entire environment within the organization.
Absolutely. And one of our really, our employee who could not speak highly enough of Plum, she's very good at sharing her stories, and she shares that internally. And I think it creates a safe space for people to go, oh, okay, I've not used it yet, but I think if she says it's good, maybe I'll give it a go. And I think that's been a very organic thing that's not been pushed from anybody. It's just she's sharing her experience of Plum. And I think that's worked really nicely, really organically and naturally.
And I think that's so powerful. If I were to again decipher this entire code, I think just comes down to that. And that really is sharing and communicating. So, we spoke about stigma. When you look at mental health, really, there's a lot of stigma. Even today, there's a lot of stigma. So one of the fundamental reasons strategically, we said, okay, we have to have a Microsoft Teams app or a Slack app, is from a convenience point of view, wherein we bring the mental health aspect within your organization. Because for remote companies today, really your Microsoft Teams or any of these types of channels are your virtual offices. So essentially what's really happened is now you've got mental well-being service within your virtual office per se. Mm-hmm. So that really helps us with that destigmatization of the whole, and changing the narrative basically. So, and it's great if we can have more and more of those conversations. So you normalize the conversation on mental health. And once you normalize that, and I joke about this with our internal clinical team as well, fundamentally, the biggest problem we have is that we don't communicate. If we communicated, we wouldn't need therapists. I mean, I'm going a little bit too extreme, but the reality is we don't communicate. If we can, and again, it's just me deciphering the code from a product standpoint, if we're able to bring Plum within your virtual workspace, which is Teams, we are normalizing that conversation that it's okay to see a workplace mental well-being tool within your workplace. So one person uses, and it's okay for her to then talk to their colleague, and then everybody just talks, and then bam, you've just normalized the conversation. And then you talk about mental health as if you would speak about you having a cough or you have a fracture in your arm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, having those initiatives throughout the year where you do, the coffee and talk or time to talk days and tea and talk we have at CFG sometimes, it's okay to talk about mental health. It's good to talk about it. And one of the things, I've suffered with mental ill health throughout my life. And one of the things that I make sure of when I'm going through a period where I'm going to have to be signed off of work because of it, I make sure the team know the reason.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hide it. It's, this is who I am, and I'm needing time off because of my mental health, just as much as I would need time off having just had knee surgery. And I want to role model it and champion it for the team, so that they feel comfortable when they need to, have those conversations. I think as well, there's another really important aspect is managers, right? Managers can often be in positions without having had that formalized training. So something that we try to do at Charity Finance Group is make sure that all of our managers are trained in having coaching skills. So they've got coaching competencies, so that when you're in one-to-ones or you need to raise, a sensitive issue, that managers are able to handle those conversations. I think your manager and employee relationship is such a core piece of work. To get them really right has such great benefits. So coaching skills for managers, I think, is a really important initiative that you can bring into.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just talking about sharing and being open about your mental health, and your example as you gave as well, if you were to take time off. And I think, there's a lot of stigma, but the reality is, for us to be able to even have this conversation on a podcast where we know it's going to be seen by so many people, and we're still able to share and communicate and talk this way, I think that's beautiful. And we've already come a long way. So I think it's just us now continuing on this, and we spoke about consistency, consistently just talking about it and then executing on the back of it. And hopefully they will, I'm hoping to see that we don't need to have a mental health awareness week or a month. It just becomes a part of our day to day.
Every day, yeah. Mental health is not just for Christmas.
No, I like that. I like that. Laura, what takeaways can people get? People listening to this, people have heard you, share and talk. But if you were to give people, let's say, some action steps or takeaways that they can implement today within that organization, what would they be?
Review your current offering. Take stock and take a really good look at what you currently do and try to find where the gaps are. Set up something where you can talk to your people, whether it's a focus group, whether you run a pulse survey, SurveyMonkey, something simple. It doesn't have to be a very big engineered thing, but just start to get snippets of data where you can start to collect that together to put together that case. I think The CIPD Wellbeing at Work is a great place to start if you need more information about the pillars and having that holistic view of wellbeing. And talk to your leadership team. Get an understanding of what their buy-in might be for this. I think that those are really good starting points.
And just a general comment to all the leadership team out there who still does not believe that mental well-being is important. Let's say for business, let's just talk about only business, who still don't believe mental well-being of their employees are important for business. What would you say?
The data is clear. The data is there. Listen to your team. They are your greatest asset.
I love that, because they are your greatest asset. And like I said earlier on as well, what is a company? A company is simply a collective of people. If your people are not in check, your company is not going to be in check.
Absolutely.
I love that. Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insight and your experience. And it's great what you guys are doing in your organization. And it's also amazing to also hear that, you have a all-female leadership team. I think more companies need that. But keep on doing what you're doing. Keep on championing what you're championing. And keep on vocalizing, keep on sharing, because it does cause a huge ripple effect. And we need that.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.